Hello from WABYA. So there's been a lot of chatter lately about using SDR Console for making amplitude measurements and how the different settings in console affect the amplitude readings. And I thought, for my own curiosity, I would go ahead and try to take a stab at making somewhat calibrated measurements using some test equipment here. What happens to the readings. For example, I have my small laptop set up. I normally don't keep it here, but what I've done is I've got my SDR Play up on top. This is the RSPdx model. We've got it fed directly into the laptop. I'm just using port A, and we've got that going over to a calibrated step attenuator. It lets us dial in 1 dB and 10 dB changes. All the cables are double shielded, either RG223 or RG400, and that goes down into, in this case I'm going to be using a Marconi signal generator. This one here is the 2051. So I went ahead first, and I guess I should give you a quick overview. We verified the accuracy of the step attenuator. It is in fact pretty accurate, within plus or minus 1 dB, especially up to these low frequencies that we're working with, less than 1 gig. It's within plus or minus 1 dB, and so that matches pretty much the accuracy, amplitude accuracy of the signal generator. The signal generator does have a external 10 meg reference connected to it. To verify the signal generator, which has just been out of cal for about a year now, we went ahead and verified its accuracy with a calibrated Agilent spectrum analyzer. We have here the 4408. So it's in cal, and I used it to verify the amplitude of the signal generator and the step attenuator, and they're in pretty good agreement with each other. So whatever numbers I get here, certainly within 1 or 2 dB accurate. Give you a quick overview. We've got lots of other test equipment, and we've got the ham shack corner. One thing I should point out, for one of my radios in particular that I use up on the microwave bands, I use a flex radio as the IF, and the SDR, the flex in this case, I use a 5000, is extremely accurate in terms of amplitude and frequency, especially when I have an external reference feeding it for frequency. But the amplitude accuracy is surprisingly accurate. It's every bit as accurate as any spectrum analyzer that I have, including some of the Asian boxes like from Siglent, or even the Agilent spectrum analyzer here. The Flex will read the amplitude easily within 1 dB, like these instruments here will. So yeah, just to show that some SDR radios are very capable of very accurate amplitude and frequency measurements. So anyway, that's the setup here. We use that to verify some of our test equipment, and that's going to be our basic setup. Laptop, we're going to be changing settings, in particular the RF gain, IF gain, and then the visual gain. And I'm going to hold the frequency constant at 55 meg. No particular reason other than it's kind of midway between HF and VHF, so could be a study in itself as to see how the different settings are possibly change with respect to frequency, but in this case I'm going to keep everything at 55 meg. But I'm going to go ahead and vary these parameters up here, with and without AGC, visual gain, IF gain, and then the RF gain for this particular SDR. And then we'll see, I'll try to summarize what I saw as far as what SDR Console reported for the Amplitude. But again, SDR Console is not designed, nor does Simon tout that it is accurate or intended to be to provide accurate amplitude numbers. So this is pretty much just for my curiosity. I was curious to see what would happen if we dial in, say, a 10 dB difference in signal level. Does 10 dB actually represent 10 dB on the S meter, for example? Or if I go down 20 dB, does it go down 20 dB? And we'll be testing that by under different conditions of those receiver adjustments noted earlier. So that's the basic setup. We'll go ahead and take some measurements, and then I'll see if I could summarize it. It's going to be a whole bunch of data, so we'll see how lucky I can get. Alright, now time to get to work. Alright, what I've decided to do, rather than me generate pages and pages of tabular data, I was just going to go ahead and leave the video running as I lower the signal level going into the SDR receiver. And I'll be starting out with the SIGGEN set to minus 60 dBm, and then I'll be adding 10 dB more. So we'll be doing minus 60, minus 70, 80, 90, minus 100, minus 10, minus 120, down to minus 130. So those are going to be the amplitude levels each time for a different baseline setup of the SDR console here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the camcorder. You'll have to excuse the hand motion here, but here's minus 60 dBm. There's minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, minus 100, minus 110 dBm, minus 120, there's minus 130 dBm. These were the settings. What I've decided to do is right now I'm going to leave the RF gain always set to max at 27. The IF gain is going to be set at its maximum of minus 20. And right now I've got the visual gain set to minus 40. Next set of data, I'm going to change the visual gain by 10 decibels and leave these two gains exactly the way they are. And we're going to go through the same scenario here and we'll see what happens. Alright, so now you can see the visual gain has been set to minus 30. AGC is still off, all these no change, same frequency. Here we go. We're starting out with minus 60 dBm going in. There's minus 70, minus 80, there's minus 90, there's minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, minus 130. Also, I should note, in all of these tests we're just using CW upper, using a bandwidth of 200 kilohertz. The single carrier with no modulation will always be very, very close to the center of the bandpass of the receiver. Alright, let's go ahead and change again the visual gain. We were at minus 40, minus 30. Let's try minus 20, see what happens. Alright, so there's visual gain set to minus 20. All the other settings are the same. This is with a minus 60 dBm signal going in. minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, there's minus 130. Alright, and just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and we'll do one more change of the visual gain. Alright, so this time I kind of jumped ahead. I'm going to go straight to 0 dB on the visual gain. All the other settings are the same. And matter of fact, we don't have to listen to that obnoxious tone, so let's go ahead and mute that. But we'll go ahead and we've got minus 60 dBm going in. There's minus 70, minus 80, there's minus 90, minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, there's minus 130. Alright, so let's go ahead now. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the visual gain, change that to something a little bit more realistic, and this time let's try varying the IF gain and see what happens. Alright, this series of tests I've gone ahead and decided, settled on a visual gain of minus 30, but notice now that the IF gain has changed to minus 30 dB. We're going to leave the RF gain max at 27. The AGC is still off. So right now we've got minus 60 dBm going in. There's minus 70. There's minus 80. Minus 90. Now, focusing went out on me here. Let me back up. There's minus 60, 70, 80, minus 90. There's minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, minus 130. Okay. So now let's go ahead and let's bump the IF gain an additional 10 dB, and we'll leave everything else the same. See what happens. Alright, so this time we've got the IF gain set to minus 40 dBm. Visual gain remains the same as minus 30. RF gain is still cranked up to its max. Here's the levels with minus 60 dBm going in. There's minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, there's minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, there's minus 130. Let's go ahead and make one more change to the IF gain just for the fun of it. We'll see what happens. Alright, so here I've changed the IF gain to minus 50. Everything else remains exactly the same. We've currently got a level, let me zoom out just a little bit here. We've got minus 60 dBm going in. There's minus 70. Minus 80, minus 90, there's minus 100, come on, minus 110, minus 120. There's minus 130. Within a couple of dB, well actually within 1 or 2 dB of the true value. So we'll have to remember these settings. It's kind of interesting, at least at this level. Alright, now let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and bring up the IF gain some. We'll leave this the way it is. Let's change the RF gain a little bit and let's see what happens. Alright, so let's establish a new baseline. I'm going to very quickly go through the attenuator settings. RF gain at 27, IF gain is minus 30, and the visual gain is minus 30. So this is with minus 60, minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, minus 130. And now we'll go ahead and change just the RF gain and we'll compare it to these numbers here. Alright, so now I've gone ahead and changed just the RF gain value. We've gone ahead and lowered it from a plus 27 to plus 20. All the other gains are remaining constant. Here it is with minus 60 dBm going in, minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, minus 100, minus 110, minus 120. Right about there. We're just about to kind of lose it into the noise floor. There's minus 130, not much of a difference. So there we go, minus 120. So at this setting anyway, RF gain of 20, with these settings here, we've lost our signal at minus 130. So I'm curious, I'm going to leave the RF gain at 20, but let me see if I can vary the visual gain and the IF gain to see if we can. I'm going to set this to minus 130, and I'm going to see if I can bring that signal back at minus 130. Alright, so we still got minus 130 dBm coming in. The RF gain is still set to a plus 20, and I've gone ahead and tried different permutations of IF gain and the visual gain. Regardless of what I did, I could change the noise floor, or at least the apparent noise floor, its level on the screen. I was not able to make the signal at minus 130 dBm appear, so the RF gain does seem to be fairly critical for establishing the sensitivity of the receiver. So let's go ahead and try one more test here. Alright, so in this test here, this is the final experiment here. What I've done is I've adjusted the max gain for 27, the IF gain at minus 20 dB, and the visual gain at 30 dB. This is just ringing the bells off the SDR here, putting in a mass. If I were to turn up the speaker, it'd be squealing with pain, I would imagine, right now. But this is the level with plus 60 or minus 60 dBm going in, and you can see there's quite a discrepancy. We're pegging the meter. Let's see if we can do anything to. Oh, I don't think there's anything we can do. We're just slamming the front end here, just killing it. Yeah, there's not much we're going to be able to do here as far as any kind of a amplitude reading. There's minus 70, minus 80, minus 90, minus 100, minus 110, minus 120, minus 130. So we can clearly set up the display to show very, very small signals, which is really cool. But as far as, you know, the amplitude numbers, here they're matching. But it looks like when we had a much stronger signal going in, of course we were just slamming the display, the S meter display, all the way over, and so we couldn't trust the numbers anymore. But the peak level, as far as the spectrum analyzer goes, that was giving us some numbers that were changing. So, all right, well, anyway, that was kind of a interesting test for me. I wanted to see just what would happen with different RF levels coming in, what these settings kind of did to the numbers. I guess what I'll do is I'll go back and analyze this video and maybe try to summarize what happened as I made these changes. For example, when we changed the IF gain by values of 10 dB, what happened to the levels indicated when we incremented 10 dB changes, or what happened when we changed this by 10 or 20 dB, same thing. What happened to the displayed levels as we changed 10, 20, 30 dB of RF coming in, things like that. I guess that'll take a little while to try to summarize all this data, but anyway, just for the fun of it, I thought I'd share it with you. 73. Alright, so I thought I would try something kind of fun here. I went ahead and monkeyed around with the settings. Right now I've got a minus 130 dBm signal coming in from our signal source. And what I've done is I've left the RF gain set to its maximum. I've got the IF gain set to minus 35. And I've got the visual gain set to minus 40. The AGC is still off. But I went ahead and made these adjustments so that I could still see clearly the signal at minus 130 dBm. So the receiver right now is fairly sensitive. We should be able to see a fairly weak signal. And the reason I like these settings is, just for the heck of it, the levels are fairly close. We're reading, peaking right around minus 129, minus 130 dBm, which is pretty close to what we're putting into it. S meter here is doesn't always correlate with what this one shows, but let me zoom out a little bit, and what I'm going to do is slowly advance the level of the SIGGEN, and we'll see if these numbers hold true to what the actual RF level coming in is. And if it does, then at least for these settings up here in this particular SDR with console, we might get some fairly good correlation between the actual RF input and what it's showing as the amplitude. So right now we've got minus 130 dBm coming in. There's minus 120, minus 110, minus 100, minus 90, minus 80, minus 70, there's minus 60. What's impressive is that number is right on, and that's within 1 dB. So let's go ahead and manually punch in even though I've got 0 dB set on my attenuator, let's go ahead and up the level to minus 50 dBm. There's minus 50, and that's very, very accurate there. That's showing minus 51.1. This bar graph is showing minus 50. Let's put in minus 40. The SDR is probably screaming right now. Not real happy with me. Yeah, so there we've got some discrepancy. Now we're looking at minus 42 and minus 43. So from minus 50 dBm down to minus 130, and let's put in a minus 140. Yeah, so not quite making it. That's a minus 140 going in. It's showing about 137, 138. This one is being more generous, 135 roughly. So I would say minus 130 dBm from minus 130 up to minus 50. These settings are fairly close. You know, they're within a dB or two. So this is at least one combination where we found that there's pretty good correlation between the RF input and what is displayed in SDR Console. Maximum RF gain, IF gain was minus 35 dB. Visual gain was set to minus 40. There we go. Anyway, this was kind of fun. 73.